Hello everyone and welcome back to Rudy's 1/6 World for our ongoing retrospective figure showcase series, where we review older figures from my collection, sometimes including figures that I haven't unboxed yet. So for today's episode, we'll be looking back at the Resident Evil 5 series by Hot Toys, and in particular at the Chris Redfield in Bsaa uniform figure. So, Resident Evil 5 was the last game in the series that I actually played. So I've never played Resident Evil 6 or even the new ones, although I've kept a little bit up to date with the series. Having said that, I really did love RE5, and I did feel like it was a very different game from the ones that came before, especially the ammo stuff. Long gone were the days of trying to conserve your ammunition. Instead, this game was much more action-oriented. But it was still a lot of fun, and this one also introduced that second playable character of Shiva Alomar, who Hot Toys also made as a figure, and I unfortunately sold, which I'm not happy about. There was a time before I moved into my house where I didn't think I would be able to ever display these, so I started parting with them, and now that I do have the space, it's one of my biggest regrets. And having said that, I can't start the review for Chris Redfield without mentioning what has to be the biggest roid rage induced moment in Resident Evil history, which involves, if memory serves, the final boss fight in the game, where Chris literally beats up a giant boulder. I mean, he's going full force on that thing. How he didn't break his hand is a mystery, granted. We don't necessarily play these games for realism, but it was one of those moments that as you're playing, you realize this is insane. And of course, appropriately enough, they gave Chris Redfield a much more jacked up appearance. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the entire package we're getting here. And the first thing that stands out is the sheer volume of weaponry included. So you're clearly getting a variety of options here, which was something nice to see Hot Toys do with their older releases. And on top of that, you did get a number of pouches and accessories for the chest rig to really kit up the figure. And you are getting that older style base, which, similar to my Wesker figure, has the biohazard designation. I will say though, the figure looks great, but there are a few things here and there besides the base that do identify this as an older release, and I will try to walk you through those as we come up on them. So let's kick things off with the accessories, and we'll start with the basics, which includes 2 spare hands. So in that department, it's not what we're used to getting these days, and these hands are specific for holding the big knife. And they do have some nice detailing and texturing, with the back of the hands having an almost mesh-like appearance to them. So while nothing crazy, it still looks nice. Next, you have 5 additional pouches that hook up to his rig. The first is a pack that connects to his lower back, and then you get an assortment of small pouches, one designed to carry extra pistol clips, one for the radio, and the other 2 are just for additional storage. They're all fabric and nicely done with variable color schemes. Where they do get annoying is attaching them to the figure. They basically are that older style military gear that you have to essentially thread in to lock together, and it can be a little frustrating. Nowadays, Hot Toys would attach pouches directly, but here they were still coming off their military figure past and leaning into that. So for those of us that have dealt with that kind of product, this is a very small taste of what we're used to getting there. Next, let's move on to the weapons, and the first one is a sidearm, which is a Beretta, which I think it includes a laser sight connected to the bottom, and he does have the spare clips. Now this is where I do feel like the guns start showing their age. Instead of having a nice matte paint dab, here it's a little rougher, and Hot Toys did do a nice detail job here, but the paint is where things go a little south. It's dry brushed and almost washed out, so they did try to make the gun look like it's real and used, and for the time period that this figure was released, it looks great. But nowadays we do see some vast improvements in the color schemes on these weapons. Next up, you get one of my favorite pieces, and that's the bazooka. Now for the metal pieces, it does suffer a little bit from the same weathering effects that the Beretta has, although with this being a larger piece, it definitely feels more forgiving. And it's also such a well detailed weapon with that really involved sight affixed at the top, so it really does pop. And you can remove the explosive grenade as well for an alternate display option. Piece overall just looks very good, and it's something that stands out, especially with a character like Chris Redfield. Now, instead of going piece by piece, I grouped the last 3 weapons together, and I did that because, as nicely done as they are, again, age rears its ugly head here, and that's because they're very limited in terms of moving parts. Nowadays, you get working actions, some 6-scale rifles even come with working safeties and movable dust covers. Here, the pieces look good, but they're almost completely molded single elements. All of the weapons, the shotgun, the AR, and the AK, all have that same weathered looking metal paintwork on the body. And there is some nice detailing here, and particularly with the AR and the attached sight. But when you look more closely, the definition of the details gets a little bit lost. While that does date the release, you are getting 3 different weapons here to display the figure. That's something we don't see much of anymore. And while I do have some minor gripes about the paintwork, they do look great. And once you have them on the figure, you just forget that. Next up, you get his large knife that includes a plastic feeling sheath, which I don't mind at all, as it avoids the pleather concerns that we collectors tend to always have to deal with. The knife itself is plastic, but really well detailed with the molded handle and the large blade that includes that nice paintwork to really show off the cutting edge. And it's nice to see pieces I remember from the game. Only slightly annoying part again is how it connects to the figure with some clips that you have to use some hobby tweezers for to really be able to affix it to the rig. The next set of accessories are all interesting pieces. First off, you get a small flashlight that connects to the figure's belt with one of those slightly annoying clips. Then you get a nice silver cell phone, although it would have been nice to get some something printed on the screen just to bring it to life a little bit more. The other slight issue, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's actually any place to put the phone. I mean, maybe you could put it in the pocket or in one of the pouches, but there's no place in the gear that's specifically meant for this. Final piece is really nice, and it's his earpiece with radio. The earpiece connects to the ear with the loop that it comes with, which is nice, and the radio slides into one of the pouches on his rig, although it is a little difficult to actually fit that in one of the pouches and get it assembled properly. It feels like maybe the pouch should have had just a little bit more stretch to it, but it's a beautiful piece with the nice text on the face and the radio and the coiled wire going up to the earpiece. So overall, nice details here by Hot Toys. And finally, you do get a grenade and some ammo boxes, which match what you typically find in the game. So a nice display piece maybe to put at the figure's feet that very much reminds you of the game you're playing. The grenade though is functional, and I'm thinking about connecting it to the figure like I did with Wesker. Why not, right? It's nice to have a fully geared up figure and have it carrying as many of the accessories as possible. So now moving on to the figure itself and starting with the sculpt, it's okay. It probably helps that it's not based on a real person, so I think it's pretty accurate to the game. The one thing I will comment on are the eyes, and I know I do tend to get a little fixated on those details when I'm looking at these sculpts, but one of the things that really sets present day figures apart from older ones are the eyes. The paint and detail work has come such a long way, and that really is what brings these figures to life and adds to that realism we see. These older lines had great detail, but the eyes weren't as good, and it definitely made it feel a little bit more toyish. If I had to note something in today's market that I'm seeing a lot with this, it would be the Exo 6 line. The tailoring on that line is on point, the sculpt work is actually pretty good, but one of the biggest issues I have on those are the eyes. They're definitely improving, but it feels like this older style of figure that we're getting. Once they resolve that, I think the sky's the limit for Exo 6. Now, going back to Chris, he has that very distinctive look from the game with the olive green shirt and the pants all armored up. And it's nice in that it's very distinctive from your standard army figures or movie figures that come in all black. You get something here that's visually interesting and that includes the Bsaa patches on his arms. The rest of the gear, including the knee pads, are all held on the figure with actual fabric straps, so again, feels more military in nature and it works great. Big thing I will mention is the body they used. This is an older muscle body with the rubber seamless arms, and it looks good, but I think you could tell that it's a little plasticky, and it feels like that too. But since Chris in the game was so oversized, it makes sense for the time period that they use this type of body, although I am hesitant to keep him in a permanent dynamic pose with the arms completely bent, because I am concerned with the tears in the bodysuit. But I will also add, for a body that should be restrictive, you can actually get some really decent poses out of it. And that does bring me to a little story. Not necessarily an issue, but it's an interesting thing that happened to me. So I was posing the figure up and trying to get a dynamic pose, or as dynamic a pose as possible. So of course at one point I felt one of the arms get to a tight spot, and I kept pushing it, and of course I got mad at myself because I could feel the arm come out of the socket, and I knew I was pushing it a little too far, but I kept going. So arm came out of the socket, and it was just hanging loose on the body. So as you can no doubt tell, shirt is very tight fitting on the figure. So of course I ended up pulling the arm out of the sleeve completely. Fortunately, the arm's connected to the body with a ball joint, so not a break. Unfortunately, the arm is so big from the muscle body that getting the arm back into position into the sleeve is essentially impossible. So I ended up having to slowly peel the shirt off the figure to expose the joint, get the arm back in place, and then slide the shirt back on, including over the arm. Not an easy process. Since the body is rubber, the shirt actually sticks to the body, so it's a challenge moving it. And on top of things, like I said, it's very tight, so I just kept getting concerned that I was going to rip it. Fortunately, I was able to be patient and get the arm in and then the shirt back on. But my small piece of advice, don't be me. Try to avoid getting that arm out of the socket if at all possible. But that was really the only issue I had with the figure, and it really was of my own doing. From a posability standpoint, the legs are actually not restrictive at all, and even though the shirt is tight and he has these giant arms, you can get some nice poses out of him. Would you keep him in those? Probably not, but it's good to see that this isn't necessarily a figure destined for museum poses. Like I said at the start, I really do love these games, and I love this collection that I have. One of the things that having this retrospective series lets me do is open up some older figures, so it's definitely a lot of fun. Now, given the recent release of the remastered game, I'm guessing Damn Toys is going to revisit this line at some point, and I would totally be in for a new Leon and a new style Ada, but I'm really hoping that at some point they revisit RE5 and give us that Shiva Alomar that I'm missing. For now though, I'm really excited to have this figure, and he looks great. So that was a quick look at Chris Redfield in his Bsaa uniform. Let me know your thoughts on this release and on the Resident Evil 5 line too. And do you think Damn Toys is going to keep going with this line? As always, thanks for watching, and if you are enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.